Hey everyone, we're gonna get started. You guys should be able to see my screen and you should be able to hear me. And today we are going over settings. So we're specifically going through all of the tabs that we find at the upper right-hand corner of our screen. So that's all that we're focusing on today. It is a very specific topic, and I just want to show you guys like what each thing means. So I highly recommend that you just watch along and take some notes. I wouldn't try to play with your own software. I just don't want you guys to miss anything. So this is recorded, of course. You can always request a copy if you email service@racoma.com. And if you guys are having trouble hearing or seeing, try to log out, log back in, make sure your chosen speaker is the correct one. All right, so let's get into it. So as you guys have any questions, feel free to ask any questions, just chat them in the chat box, and I will monitor that as we go along, and I will answer your questions as I see them, okay? So just let me know that everyone can still see and hear. Just want to make sure everyone is good. There's only 3 of you guys here in the class, so I can wait just a moment to make sure Joan can see. So today I am using Chroma Luxe. I wanted to show you guys all of the available options that we have. So if you have Inspire or if you have Plus, then obviously you won't have all of the same options, but it's important just to see what we do have available to us, and it will still make sense if you have one of the different tiers, okay? Okay, so again, today we're going through the settings. So right now we're going to focus on this upper right-hand corner. So we have various tabs up here, everything from transform to commands to column, push, pull, compensation, underlay, fill, text, and even just a design tab general. So we'll go through each one, and some of the settings will apply to just like one specific stitch type. So if I were to click on my run stitch, I might just have a couple options here. Whereas if I click on a satin, I do have quite a few more. So I'll make sure that we sort of talk about the differences as well. So I'm gonna just start with the satin stitch here. And so let's just zoom in a little bit on the satin stitch, and then I'll talk about the differences with text, run stitch, and complex fill. So the first tab that we have is just a general design tab. So we can name our files here. You can type in like keywords and you can rate it. So just pretty simple, self-explanatory. The second tab is what is really going to pop up automatically when you select an object, and that is the fill tab. So the fill tab is applying to what type of fill pattern that we might have, and we can see that on our satin, we do have different fill types. Like we can actually make an embossed design. So I can actually add a different effect to a satin stitch. We have the same capability on a complex fill, and you have quite a few different options to choose from. So if you're looking at the emboss fill type, you have this drop down of so many different fills to choose from. So they don't have names, they're just created designs by the developer, and you can see just a variety of options here. So there's no like real catalog with a name, they just have a number, and you can go through and sort of see how they all look. So we have different fill types like emboss, contour, whipped, and raised. So you guys can really play with these and take a look at each one. It's going to give you a different look on your stitch. So a contour is actually just going to mimic the contour of the shape. So like I have this triangle, that's the contour. I have a column, it's a contour. We have whipped. This is a different effect where if we look at this a little bit bigger, we can actually change like the style of the stitch. So sometimes we want to add specific effects to our design to make it look more realistic, or if we're doing something like grass or hair, you can add in a different fill to give that effect where we're looking at something and it looks more realistic or 3D. So the raised, so this is going to be a layered effect where you can actually change the number of layers. So I could put, 4 or 5 layers here, and you can see that we have, one base layer, and then it kind of goes inwards. So it's going to create a raised effect. So again, a lot of these, you can play with these. You can kind of just adjust to how you want it. And it's really just at the very top, you're choosing the fill type, and you can choose the pattern. So if we have like a regular fill type, we can set one of our regular patterns, or you can just keep it sort of as is. The options that we might see below the fill type and pattern is the stitch length. So our stitch length is the actual length of the stitch that we have, and the density is going to be how close those stitches are together. So we usually talk a lot about density in the webinars, and you can of course adjust that there. If we look back at our complex fill shape, we have the same sort of effects, the stitch length and the density. And the density, of course, is the distance between each stitch. And the stitch length is going to be the actual length between needle points. So if we want it to be like a shorter stitch length, it's actually going to add more needle pokes into the fabric. If we have a longer stitch length, it's many less needle points in the fabric. So just keep in mind, if you set your stitch length very low, that could actually cause you some issues. Like the machine is poking so many more times into the fabric, so it could actually cause some ripping. So I wouldn't recommend to have your stitch length so small. Just keep in mind, you can see all these small dots in the red. Those are all of those needle points. And this shape is now 1,000 stitches. Whereas if I set it to like the default, like 3 or 4, it reduces the number of stitches by almost half. And we'll have way less pokes in our fabric. So The stitch length is something you can certainly play with and adjust, but it's important to know that more pokes will cause a little bit more damage to your fabric. So the first tab is the fill tab, and if we look at a run stitch, a run doesn't have fill. It's a single line, so we don't have that tab here. If you look at the run stitch options, we have way less. So I'm going to go through the run stitch very last, and a lot of those will have already gone over. So let's take a look at the next tab over, and it's the underlay. An underlay is necessary to provide a smooth base for our top stitches. It helps to tack the backing to the garment. It helps to provide anchor points for our stitches to adhere to. So an underlay is really important for most all of our objects or shapes. And an underlay can also help to, say, flatten out a fluffy material or flatten out the center of a hat. And so the underlay is very important to know about and to make sure that we are using one. Every object that you create, whether it be a satin, a steel stitch, a complex fill, or if you're creating lettering, there will always be an underlay automatically selected. And so you can leave the underlay as the default if you're just starting out. It's not something that you have to change, but as we become more advanced, changing the underlay will help out with certain fabrics. Or if we're doing very small lettering, we would use a center line. So I believe that we have a full video on the different underlays. You'll notice on a satin stitch, it's usually going to be a parallel, possibly a center line, or a zigzag. So let me go through pretty briefly, but I'll talk about each one. So right now we're going to look at this purple object that is closest to our settings boxes. So it's a satin. The contour underlay will create a run stitch that is going around the contours of that shape. So when I click apply, you can see that now I have a rectangle that is just inset from the edges of my shape. So a contour can help to be more of like anchor points for those stitches. So you can use a contour for objects or lettering. Sometimes you'll use a contour. The settings that we have below the choices are as follows. So the density, this is really referring to something like a zigzag or a parallel, and it's going to be the distance in between each underlay stitch. So like if we were to change the density of the contour, it doesn't really work because it's just a single line running around. If we have a parallel, you can see that right now I have 4 millimeters in between each stitch. Or if I change it to lower, those stitches, the zigzag part of it gets very close together. So we have density, the stitch length. So the stitch length is going to be referencing the underlay stitch length, like the zigzag part. So let's turn on our stitch ends. And the way that I'm turning on the stitch ends is I have a key at the very top, like middle of my screen. Looks like a little triangle. And that way I can see the actual points where the needle will puncture. So the stitch length right now it's at 3 millimeters. That means the underlay stitch length is 3. The run stitch length, let's say I increase this, we're going to see this, the center line down the middle of that shape. Oops. The center line will change and we'll have way less needle points. So it's changing it to like 8 millimeters. So the stitch length is like the zigzag part, and the run stitch is when it just goes in a single running line. The inset is going to be how far inwards that underlay is from the edge of your shape. Let's take a look at the contour for a better example. Right now it's inset at just 0.7 millimeters. If I inset it to 2 millimeters, we'll see that that underlay is going to move towards the middle. So it's much closer into the center of my shape. So that way we won't risk it popping out of the inside of the letter or shape. And zigzag inset will refer to a zigzag underlay. So we can have it moved in very far. So you can see that zigzag underlay in the middle of that shape is very, very far in. We don't have those needle points towards the edge. So we have contour. Parallel is the default for satin objects. Just goes in a single zigzag down the center. Center line will just have a single running line down the middle. So very minimal. This is for small lettering. Very, very minimal. We can see that single line just down the center. Perpendicular is going to be for your complex fill. Zigzag is a double zigzag. So it looks similar to a parallel, but it has a double. So it's good for more plushy fabrics or things that need a little bit more stability. So let's take a look at our complex fill object, and we can take a look at these underlays for our complex fill. Oops. So on the complex fill object, we can do perpendicular. That means that the underlay is going to run perpendicular to the top stitches. So you can see these big thick lines running up and down through the shape, and our top stitches are running left to right. So it's perpendicular. A lattice is going to provide a more diagonal underlay, so we can sort of have our stitches sort of cross over each other. And a full lattice is both ways. So if you do have something that's very fluffy or textured, then a full lattice will help to smooth out that fabric. If you're doing something on maybe like a corduroy or a fluffy fleece, then that full lattice will be the best option. And then edge travel, that I wouldn't really use this one because it's not quite a full underlay there, and you can see that it's just that kind of single line to start up the object. So very, very minimal on the edge travel. We can still do a contour, so it will be just, again, around the contour of the shape. And all of those density, stitch length, inset settings will apply the same way to a complex fill. So when you are looking at letters or any shape, the inset, it really will depend on what your item is and what your fabric is, but you can definitely leave the inset as the standard. So let's create a new shape and we can just see what the default is. So the default inset is about 0.7. Now, if you're having difficulty with this underlay sticking out from underneath your letter, then you might want to inset that more, and that way you won't risk it popping out. So let's say we look at this contour, and let's say it's set at like a 0.5. The contour underlay is very close to the edge. So if that underlay ends up sticking out from those top stitches, then that's where we might want to inset it more. So adding in, and you can go any value really. So now it's way more towards the center and we won't have any risk of that underlay sticking out. So that is the underlay tab. The next one we have is we have push-pull compensation. So let me create two identical columns, and I'm going to explain what push-pull compensation is. So when we stitch out objects, when they are a satin, when we stitch them out, we may end up seeing that our stitch out is a lot thinner and maybe it's a lot higher than our what's on our screen. So it might end up looking something like this when we actually stitch it out. So the one on the left is what it looks like on our screen, and when we stitch it out, it's looking thinner but longer. So what that is due to the push and pull of your stitches. When you stitch on a fabric, the stitches will pull a bit on your fabric depending on how stretchy or soft it is. So if you stitch something on a really stretchy, soft polyester shirt, those stitches will pull more on the fabric and you'll end up with a skinnier column. If you're doing something that's very sturdy and thick, you have a lot less pulling. The other thing that we have is we have push. So when these stitches are laid down next to each other, the actual threads will end up pushing on each other and you get a longer looking column. So what we have is we have push and pull compensation, and this is where we can essentially compensate for those factors. So the first one being pull compensation. We can set this in a percentage or an absolute value. Percentage would just be, say, let's compensate 130%, right? And it's going to extend past the edge about 30%. Absolute will be a measurement in millimeters. So we could really put 0.3 millimeters or 1 millimeter, and that way it's extending past the edge in that value. So you can choose whichever you prefer. And the best way to really determine how much you might need it depends on what fabric you have. And I always recommend just to do a test out and kind of go from there and play with the values. So the value percentage, we have B, F, and S. B is both sides. So I do want to add pull comp on both sides, not just the first or the second. So And again, you have the max range and the absolute range. So on both sides or the first or second. So that's what those small letters are. So you can see that when I did add in 130, or if I add in 150 and I apply it, this shape has become much thicker, right? It's much wider. Let's go to talk about the push compensation. So the push is going to be affecting the top and bottom, whereas pull is more on the left and right. If we're adding in some push compensation, we can, again, choose which side, and we can add in a value. So if we say add in, 0.5, you see that it shrunk down a bit. Because when we actually go to stitch it, those stitches and threads are going to end up pushing on each other, and we'll end up having a column that's a little bit longer. So you can see that if I add the value higher, 1, then it's really shrinking that down. Okay, so that is our push-pull compensation, and something that you can do to really get a default on your push-pull is if you change the style. And when we right-click on an object or a digitized piece, and we go into utility and we change the style, it's allowing us to choose the fabric. So a pullover will have a different pull compensation than, say, a canvas. And I just changed the style to a pullover that's like a sweatshirt fabric. And it set my pull compensation for me. We can change the style to, say, leather, and you see it adjusted to 0.2. The style also helps, like let's say fleece, it helps with the underlay. This changed the underlay for me. So changing the style is really helpful if you know that you're digitizing for a specific type of material. You can change the style, and it does provide default settings as far as the underlay, the density, and the push-pull compensation. So the max range is that the maximum that we can add in, like pull comp, is going to be this range. And it really won't allow you to add in something that doesn't make sense. If I add in 180%, it just reverts back to 150. So it's not going to allow you to do something really like crazy and wild. So that's going to be like the max range that you have to set it to. So we also have, you still have push and pull compensation on a complex fill shape as well. If you wanted to add in a little bit there, that can help with like circles, because again, these stitches, they will pull a little bit. And so maybe your shape ends up looking a little bit smaller. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the next tab, and I just have this yellow satin column here, and we're going to look at column. So under column, we have some effects. These are more so like effects that we can play with as like options. So this tab, you could really ignore it unless you want to add something special. So the first one is jagged, and it's going to do just like what it is showing in the drop down. If we put like a jagged type, it's going to set a jagged edge. And this can be used for things like hair or grass or something that you might need this irregular look for. So it's really nice to do to have this option. Again, like if we want to make a little bit of grass, you can set that there. You can play with the value. So it's going to be like max of like 5 millimeters difference here. And you can do first, second, or both, or just keep it at none if you want just regular satin column. The bottom area where we have split satin, this is actually going to allow us to split a satin column to account for something that we might need it to be larger. So if you guys have taken any of the prior webinars, we do touch on this. So a satin stitch, it really cannot be any wider than about 0.8 inches. So this is like just around 0.8, and we're seeing that we're losing stitches in the middle. The machine just isn't going to jump from needle point to needle point that wide. So we can use a split satin to create wide satins above the usual limit. And what you can do is choose %, absolute, or random. So let's choose %, and we can split this into, say, like 40%, or maybe we do 50%, and it's splitting it in half. If we do 30, it's going to have more like 3 sections, right? So you can see there's sort of what looks like an embossed line in the middle, and this fills in our satin. So before, when we didn't have this, we're missing stitches, but we can split it, and that way it will look like a satin, and it just has like a little bit of an extra stop point in the middle. The where is it? The random, so we have %, absolute. So again, we're kind of back to where it was similar in the push-pull, just 2 different like ways of setting it. Like you can do percentage-wise or just an absolute value. If you choose random, it will reduce the visibility of that center point. So right now I don't really see like a clear line down the middle, but if I were to do % and I split it 50-50, I see that clear line. So random would be helpful just to like eliminate the visibility of that split. Okay, so we're gonna go on to the next, which is we're gonna create just 2 shapes. So we went through column. Now, general. So we have different connection types, and that just means like the way that the stitch goes back. So it's kind of like a turn in a way. So if we're looking at, let's take a look at this complex fill shape. If we're looking at this, and if we go into the general tab, we have some different connections. So right now, if I zoom in on one of the edges here, this is a chiseled connection. It's like a diagonal or a slant. We could set this to square, and it's actually going to have a square corner. Now this does add a small extra stitch. So it is adding in more stitches. If we look at our sequence panel, right now I have 908 stitches. And if I do chiseled, it's going to reduce that by a little bit. So now it's 772. So the connection type, you can play with this for like your preference. The square connection type will be better for more like low density shapes or objects. But if you have that square connection type, it is going to create small stitches, and then that might hurt the fabric as far as adding in like so many more needle points. So again, we can see that here where we have needle points all the way across the edge instead of just like one chiseled needle point. Okay. So you can change the values of the chisel, the density, and there is a gradient option, and that just provides exactly what it says is a gradient look. So I can make this complex fill a nice gradient here, increasing, decreasing, convex or concave. And that's a nice effect that you can use to create different shapes and realistic items. On a satin, we do have a couple extra options. So chiseled and square aren't quite going to be for a satin. We're really going to do either like a sharp or a zigzag. So if you look at the image that's sort of next to each one, a sharp is going to be more at a slant, and a zigzag will be more so like a straight. So let me try to see if we can see the difference. It's very minimal, but if you look at your object really up close, you'll see the difference. So they're more, they're actually more like faced downwards, and if I do zigzag, then you can see it actually moved away from that blue line that I just dragged down. So just giving you a different connection type. And we do still have that gradient option, so we can make little gradient look here, and we can change the density there. So the max density is 1 millimeter, or maybe it's 4, and that way it really spaces out. Okay. So speaking of gradient, we're going to take a look at the next tab, which is our blend tab. And this is a great feature that is available in just Chroma Luxe. So with the gradient tab or the blend tab, we can blend colors together. So let's say I need this gray shape to be more like bluish grayish, and I want to blend two colors. I can enter in the, oops, it's the wrong box. I can enter in the color. So let's see, I'm going to choose number 9, which is a blue. and it will, let's choose something darker maybe. Oops. There we go. 9, or we can do 13. And so you see how it's actually blending some blue over top of the gray. So you can choose the color and then the densities. So the density, if you have a wider range from the density to the max density, then this is going to really pertain to our gradient. So we can put a gradient on top of another shape. So we can do increasing or decreasing, and we can see at the very bottom, the stitches are about 0.5 millimeter apart, and towards the top, they are 4 millimeters. So, and you can actually do this with 3 colors. So if we wanted to add in a third and maybe do linear decreasing, then we can have a really interesting blended effect here. So I actually have 3 very different colors. Let's, we can just make them, here's a, we have a red, we have a gray, and then we have like a yellow. So you can do the same thing on your satin. So works the same way. You're either blending or you're adding a gradient. So if you're blending, you're just adding in an extra color on top to create a blended look. So this is the pink and red. Or if you want to add a gradient, then it will, again, be a little bit different, either increasing, decreasing, convex, or concave. So that's a really nice feature to get those blended gradient looks. So yes, you can do 2 color gradient. So this is actually a total of 3 colors. And if you didn't want a gradient, if you just wanted to blend them, you can certainly blend them. However, you're really putting a lot of stitches on top of each other. So just keep that in mind. If you're blending 3 colors, you might want your initial density to be a little bit high, and that way you don't have such a bulky shape. So we can blend gray, yellow, red, but I don't want my initial complex fill shape to be at a low density. It's going to give me just a really bulky stitch out. So you can certainly do 2 colors or 3 color gradient. You can also do, I'm going to move that to the side. You can do letters in a gradient or a blend. And what we actually have to do here is with our text, you can see that I don't have that option up top. The blend option is gone. Right click, break up your text, and right away we have our blend option back. So when we're working with text, a lot of times we have to right click and we have to break it up. So if I go again to do that one more time, right now this text is all one object. If I right click, break up text, now I can actually control each individual. So while they are all still selected, I can go to the blend tab. I want to make sure I check second color, and then in the color box I have drop down of all of my color chips. So if you look at the bottom of my screen, if I want to blend orange, I'm going to choose color 11. And I can apply, and now we have orange blended with my red. And we can make this increasing or decreasing. We can also add 3 colors, so whatever you want to do, you can do that with letters as well. Just make sure you break them up. So the blend is awesome. I definitely love this effect. It's so easy to use, and it really creates something that looks way more luxe. And I guarantee you'll have customers that are just wowed by it, because it's not something that you see very often in just your standard, embroidery. We can make, all of the letters like different. You can really do a lot. So that's the blend tool. I love it. Personal fave. So good questions on that. All right. The next tab that we have, so let me just open like a fresh page. Okay. So we have blend, and then we have commands. In the commands tab, you do have the color command, start and end command, and tie in and tie offs. Also branches. So the first thing is the color. We can change our color if we right click on a color chip. So I right clicked on color number 20. We can also change the color if we type in the color number. So I still just have those 20 color chips at the very bottom of my screen. If I want to make this triangle purple, then I'm going to type in number 4. So I'm looking down at the bottom of my screen. There's number 4. So you can change the color up here. This sometimes is better for customers that may be using a trackpad and they don't have a right-click functionality, which I advise against that. I would use a mouse. I would get an external mouse if you're on a laptop. It's just going to be much easier to maneuver around, left click, right click. So, but that is there for you to change the color. The commands, now I rarely use a start command, and this really does depend on the machine as well. Also the tie in and tie off. So our machines, they automatically tie off when they trim. So our machines auto create a knot. So this is available for certain machines that might not have that capability. So that way we can use Chroma if we have something maybe very simple like a single needle machine that doesn't automatically do that for us. So our commands as well, sometimes if we try to set a frame out, well, depending on the machine, maybe it doesn't read that command. We can do that directly on the machines panel. Same thing for like low and high speed, a boring machine. So this is really the bore on, bore off. That's for a specific type of machine. So these commands are there because Chroma is universal. You can use it with any machine. But for Ricoma machines, the start commands, we really don't need to use that. The end command, the reason why we want to be aware of this is because you can see here I have 4 shapes and they all have a big stitch connecting them. It's a jump stitch, and it's normal to see that when you have objects that are close together and they're all the same color, because the machine doesn't want to make more trims than it has to. It wants to just jump from one to the next. But when we see this, that we notice right away, and on our garment, we don't really want to have those long stitches. So what we can do is we can select our objects and we can tell the file or the machine to end command and to have a trim. Because right now it's just jumping and that's what the machine will read. But if we add in a trim, we can see that it trimmed. So you can actually select all shapes and you could type in or drop down trim, and then that puts a trim. So that's really what we want this tab for, is that's very important. The tie-in and tie-off, you do have different tie-ins and tie-offs. We might be able to see that a little bit better, maybe on a run stitch. Let's see if we can really add in a triangle tie-off. So here on our run stitch, you see at the very end here, it's a little triangle. That is the machine's going to do a little triangle and make a knot. So things like this make sense at times, but on a Chroma, our machines make a really sturdy knot. We can just leave it at none and it's still creating a knot automatically. So the regular knot is normal. A line is going to be less visible. You can see we have a couple extra needle points at the very end of the shape. So that's what I'm looking at just here. You see these tiny, tiny dots. A triangle will be very, very, very secure. A line will be less noticeable, and then basic is just a standard. And if you leave it at none, again, the machine automatically makes a knot. So you're fine if you leave it there. Okay. Now, and of course, if you need, for some reason, if you need it to be very, very sturdy, you can have this tie off, repeat 3 times. Now, the next command that we have, if we actually type out some text, we have some extra text commands, and we have I'm going to type out something a little different. We have trim branches. A branch is connecting like the top of an I or the top of a lowercase j. That's going to be a branch. So this is considered a branch, not so much a jump stitch. So if we trim the branches, then it will trim that line between those lowercase i's. So that is something you can do. I'm trying to think of another letter that might have that, but trim branches, it pertains to a letter. And then we have text commands. And so if we have some really, really small text, we might have like a little jump stitch in between, and we can trim those jump stitches in the text commands. So we can trim in between characters, we can trim in between words. So we just want to trim between these words. We can trim longer than a specific measurement. So those were longer than 2 millimeters, so it did trim. And then we can also color change. If I want each letter of a word to be a different color, we can color change, and it just sets it at a random color here. So it just sets it at your first few options. On the machine, you can type in whatever color you want, but it does allow you to quickly color change in between characters or words, or maybe we have multiple lines and we can change there. So let's take a look back at just some regular shapes. And we have about 2 boxes left. So here's a little square. The last option is the transform box. So the transform box is where you can manually type in the size. If I know this has to be 3.12 inches wide, I can set 3.12 inches wide. So that's really just pretty easy enough. If we have a design has like multiple components and we need to do something that is a certain distance away from the center of our design, then where you see position, I can position this red box a specific number of inches or millimeters away from the center of the file. So that's very like technical there, but you can position things. If you're doing maybe like a design on the hat, you can position something in an X and Y. And then we do have rotate, so we can rotate to a degree, or we can mirror or flip. This is not the best shape to mirror because it's a square, but we can mirror it, so you can mirror or you can flip, and that's going to flip more so on the horizontal. So mirror will be the vertical and flip is the horizontal. So going back to the text that I had, when I did change the color of each letter, I actually didn't break it up. So I can leave this text as is. I can trim the branches, so trim that I, and then I can color change characters without breaking it up. So now this text is all still the same. And again, it just chose all of the random colors here. That really doesn't matter because when I put this onto the machine, I know that I can choose whatever color for the C, then the H, then the A, then the N, and you'll see that in the print preview. So if I'll delete these items here, but if you go into your print preview, you'll see that you can choose a different color for each letter, whatever colors you might want. You can choose red, white, red, white, red, white, and that'll be easy to do instead of if you didn't do it this way and you wanted to break up all the text and then manually select every other letter and change it that way, it's just more work for you. So I would just color change if you know you want them to be able to be separate. And so going back to like that blending option, you can blend, it's just a max of 3 colors, but if I wanted it to be, say, if I wanted this to be, I'm going to do convex, so that means it's very low or it's very thick in the middle. So I did general and I did gradient on my first shape. So what I'm doing is I'm going to do a little color spectrum. It'll be red, it'll be orange into red into yellow. So I have in the general tab, I have convex. In the blend tab, I'll do second color. We're going to do orange. And we'll do it's more thick at the left side. And then I'll do third color and it's going to be yellow. And I'll do linear decreasing and it's going to be more thick at the right side. So as like an example, you can sort of do this blending sort of look and just playing with the densities. You have something that's like more orange, then moving into red, then moving to yellow, as an example. So one last box that we have, and then any more questions you guys have, chat them now. We have our text box. So that's what's popping up right away when you type out some text. And in these options here, so it's the very first one, we have just pretty self-explanatory, but you have like the height, the spacing, so that's the spacing in between letters, line spacing, optimize colors, italic, stairs, that's if you want them to look like that. You can order them from like center to the right. That means they're going to stitch out. It'll probably be X. It will be E, T, and then XT. That's good for hats. So sequencing. You can align it. You can change the types if you need it to be curved. You can change it there. And then you have true type texts that you can adjust. So the text option is up there. And then run stitch will show up at times. And that's referring to the run stitch that's going to be, oops, like down the center of the letter. So we look at our letter. We can change the run stitch length to break it up. There's another thing that, speaking of run stitch, if you look at here, run stitch, so stitch length is like how the distance in between each puncture hole, right? So we have the stitch length, and then in run, if you have just a single run stitch, you have different types, and you can do a 2-ply, that means it's going to go over the path twice. You can do a bean that actually repeats itself every 3 stitches. So you can see that here. A motif, you have quite a few motifs, so you can make like a run stitch motif, and this will be interesting for just specialty type of items. Projection is going to like repeat in a projection, just like that. Double rope, it goes back around twice, but not in the same needle hole. So you have something that looks a little bit thicker like that. And then you have triple rope, and that will again be like 3 times over, but not in the same needle hole really. So you have these areas where it kind of crosses over. Instead of like a 2-ply, it's puncturing into the same spot. So you can't really see the difference here visually. So we went over everything, all of those boxes, and if you guys have any additional questions, you can always reach out to us. If there's something specific or something that you may have forgotten, email service@ricoma.com. I believe I went through everything. If there's one thing that you might need just a quick refresher on, let me know. And then